like? Oh, awesome. So one of the things, God, we thought there's a big line in the bathroom right now, so don't go right now. It's not that big, you guys. It was funny because Gary had to go earlier, and I chased him down because he had his mic on, and I said, Gary, I've been there before. Don't do it.
So it's like that was a Jim Carrey moment, I think, if I remember the movie correctly. Yeah.
So while we're waiting for them, I want you to think about this, and I don't want you to say anything out loud. You can just think about this and tell me. But are you afraid? Are you afraid? Are you excited? You know? I mean, if you look at what's happening and all the different things that are happening in the world, it's really up to us as to how we want to tackle this, and we're really excited. And one of the things we want to do at the end is talk a little bit about ISDI, just like 1 minute. But actually, we can do it now while the people are in the bathroom if you want. But the idea, not just with ISDI, but all of these alternative education type approaches that are there today, is that your baseline fundamental education that you received going through college, you have to figure out how to keep current. So take advantage of what's out there and do those things. And ISDI is going to be right for some people. There's other programs that are going to be right for others. But understand what's happening, because everything that we're talking about, as soon as you learn something, it becomes much more simple, right? And right now, when you don't know something, you remember when you didn't know how to use a phone? I mean, I remember people that would not. I'll never own a cell phone. I will never. My landline. How many people have a landline? I still get for getting the newspaper, because my wife and I like to do the crossword puzzle. But jokingly, Jimmy Fallon always says that that's where you know where all the old people live, is where they still have newspapers on the ground.
Right. Yeah.
So thank you for turning in your questions. The first one's actually for Greg. And Greg, the question is, in the next 5 years, what are you most concerned about, and what are you most excited about?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think there is some anxiety around this in the political spectrum, and Gary talked a little bit about that, and you as well talked about how the perception that some of these changes are only played out as negative consequences all the time may color the conversation and may force politicians to make some poor decisions in terms of how they get deployed, and we may get some regulatory frameworks that make it harder for some of these things to actually happen. And the converse of that is, I actually think that this notion of building a more human experience is actually the direction that we're going towards. We're moving towards more mediated experiences. People want to spend time together and be face-to-face and not have technology disintermediate them from their lives as much as we spend time on our devices. And a lot of the work that's happening right now is around simplifying the basic necessity items of our lives. And we're actually, I'm very optimistic that we're actually going to have more free time in our lives to do more creative pursuits inside of work and outside of work. And I'm really enthusiastic about that, because I think if we become a planet of creatives, it would be really awesome.
Absolutely. A couple of things about Greg, by the way. Greg actually was in design at SAP and actually started App House for SAP, which is now kind of turned into a little bit of HANA House and that whole platform. He was also Chief Experiential Officer at GE, and one of the primary folks that drove the Internet of Things and that whole platform there. And he's currently running Google Cloud interface and design and so on. And he is going to be running our design module. So I did a very poor job of introducing him earlier, and just want to make sure that you know who he is. So the next,
just one other thing, I've had like 11 careers so far.
11 careers, yeah. Well, my favorite moment with Greg was actually driving up to Stockton to take our boys airsoft extreming. So that was really fun to talk all the way up there.
Kyle went.
And
Kyle
boys,
was
So the next question is for Jenny. And the question is, do you consider the popularity of peer-to-peer sales, i.e. Poshmark, LetGo, and so on, a threat to traditional and even online retail?
I could tell you that there's so much going on. That's the last thing we're thinking about, being a competition. But personally, I actually love those platforms. I think it's great to be able to recycle what you have and share and the community of that. I myself actually wearing today, something from Real, if you know what that platform is. So I think it is definitely growing. And there, as we all know, we all have a closet full, a room full of clothes, and how do you get rid of it is really by recycling it. So I think it's going to keep growing, but I certainly don't think that is, at this point, is the focus of competition. But one thing I learned in retail: never say never.
So I have a follow-on question for you, Jenny. In addition, so by the way, Jenny was a Gap, started Old Navy with a group of executives and was president of Old Navy, and then became president and CEO of Charlotte Russe. She's also on the board of Levi's. And one of the things I don't understand is, why is it that you're talking about all this change and everything else, but when you go to the Levi's store, it's still 509s. And all they do is they change the number of buttons, or 501s or whatever, right? It's the same exact thing. So how do you, how do they do well?
Well, first of all, you might not know this, but the 501 there's of course original 501, but there's many iteration of 501s. So, and certain things are left alone because of the authenticity of that product, and 501 is one of those things. But you keep tweaking it, and you might not know that it's changed. That if you ever pull out something in your closet that you love for many, many years, and 20 years in, and you put it on, and even though it's back in trend, but it still doesn't look the same. Because, like your red leather pant, if you put it on, even though maybe it's back in style, it's not going to look the same. So the tweaking of something is very necessary, and you might not even know it's changed. And the 501 is one of those items. So it's so perfect to begin with. Why would you want to fuss with it?
Why would you bedazzle it? Why would you even do that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Why would you bedazzle? I think is the
That's the general point. Yeah, that's my general point.
Just remember, it was very, very popular to bedazzle something.
Bedazzling.
So the next question is for Lauren. This is like the dating game. If you could go back 5 years, what skill do you wish you would have learned?
So many. I think a lot now, even on my end, on what are the gaps that I have. What are the things that I wish I knew 5 years ago? One big piece of it is on the SaaS side. So I've been in SaaS. I've been in California almost 10 years, so I've been in the SaaS world for 9. I'm only just starting to care about post-sales experience and what happens to the customer, and not just after they buy, what do you do, and how do you get them to use the product, and what is the entire process, and how do you go deeper with adoption and upsell and really adding value. I am now just really spending time and digging into that, and it's completely changed how I think about acquisition and marketing. I wish I would have known that 5 years ago and had the desire to think through that a little bit more 5 years ago. It would have exposed weaknesses I didn't know I had until now. And the other thing, honestly, is Spanish. I'm tired of being an American that only speaks English. And when is the best time to learn a language? Yesterday. When's the second best time to learn a language? Now. So if I can go back in time 5 years, if you guys can help me pick that up.
That would be great. Okay, very good. So I'm going to start with Gary on this one, but I want the rest of the folks to also think about this. Gary. Oh, you're mic'd up.
I'm mic'd
so
up.
The question for you, but also for the
before.
rest of you. So think about this. This is homework for everyone. I didn't hear what you said.
Keep going, man. You're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the number one skill you think people need today?
Actually, you mentioned this one before, so I was thinking of it. I'd say distillation. And what I mean by distillation, I was kind of thinking of, I wanted to say analytics, and then I also wanted to say writing and communications. But I think both of them actually come down to distillation. On the analytics side, the reason I say that is I don't think you have to understand like down to the core data science point necessarily, that you're going to go into that as a career. But the ability to take lots of data and synthesize it and know which data is real. I mean, there's tons of data inside organizations, but actually knowing what data is actually real. What are the metrics you ought to care about when you actually get the data? Is it legit? Being able to smell when something is actually just off. And so distillation from the analytics side is critically important. And like at Facebook, we run the brand essentially on kind of 5 metrics. But figuring out what were those 5 metrics to get to was a lot of work in that as distillation. And I think the other point, and actually I'll plug a book that it's actually kind of like a textbookish thing that I thought was quite important. There's a woman named Barbara Minto who wrote this book called The Pyramid Principle that essentially is how to take lots of words and concepts and things like that and be able to distill them down into something that's easily presented. So the other point I think is really important because the amount of information, the amount of the pace at which things are going in a company. I had some earlier time in my career, I was in McKinsey for a set of years. The biggest thing I got out of that McKinsey was actually 2 things. One is I married my wife, who was a client and asked me out. Yeah, believe me, I needed it. And what's that?
I said, more power to her.
Oh, totally. If you met her, a couple of people out here know her, if you know her, for sure. And the other was the ability to take lots of conceptual stuff and break it down into something I can present very, very quickly. And I think the idea of kind of distillation on both sides of the brain is pretty important.
Very good.
Oh, that's my mic.
Sorry, someone else?
Yeah, I just echo, in the design thinking world, we use the same term, but it's synthesis, right?
Yeah.
It's synthesizing constructs into actionable insights, things which you can act on, that as an organization you're capable of moving forward with, and that are meaningful to your customer in some important way. And then the other thing I would say added to that is become a great storyteller, because you have to distill, and then you have to have a narrative, and then the narrative is how you make things happen in organizations or with customers or with people.
Both of those are great. To add on, I would say, I think you and I chatted a little bit about it, is really continuous learning.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I truly mean this. I feel like I've been in retail for over 30 years. I was telling somebody, I think I know less today than I knew 5, 10 years ago. And because of the ever-changing, and I think the learning also comes with an incredible sense of curiosity. Wanting to really find out and not be afraid. I think we keep using the word not being afraid. And especially in fashion retailing, it's all about taking risk, calculated risk. So.
And then to echo a lot of that in the distillation piece, I think the flip side of it is also translation. I'll give you an example. I have an incredibly talented CEO, and who is very involved and really enjoy working for him. And he'll come and he'll ask for something very specific. What you have to know so much now is not necessarily what someone's technically asking you for, but what are they really asking you for? And how do you start to translate from that of, I want you to do X. Well, have that curious mindset. Why do you want me to do X? What problem are you really trying to solve? And really learning how to translate what your boss is asking you to do versus what they really want. Translating what the customer is saying, I want this. No. That might be what you want, but what problem do you really have? And how do I make sure I translate what you think you want to what you actually want, whether it's a coworker, a manager, or a customer?
I don't think I can add much other than just maybe reframing what you guys were saying, which is trying to find the signal in the noise, because we live in really noisy universes. And I also think from a career perspective in answering that question is what you really want to invest in, and what you're really tempted not to invest in, is you want to invest in building trust. Trust is so powerful. Some people think hard work gets you ahead. Hard work does get you ahead. Trust gets you further. And trust can be obtained through hard work. But the goal is not always hard work. The goal is trust. And if we're looking at a device more than we're looking at another human being, I think you're going to be challenged in their capability of building trust. So investing the time in building authentic relationships, super important, as we have all this noisy distraction around us.
So while we're with you, Steve, this question's for you, and then we can come back with the wave, if that's okay. With change in individual transformation, what do you look for in hiring now compared to 5 years ago? Is there something that doesn't matter anymore?
I look for people who've been in pretty crazy situations. That's really important to me, that they've been able to demonstrate that they can work in a very frenetic, very fast-paced, changing organization, and they can bring some sense and some ability to build, because a lot of us are building now. My whole career prior to going to a private pre-IPO company was fixing and tuning what other people had done before me. And when I was finally in a sort of a 400-person company at LinkedIn, and we were just growing like crazy, learning how to build and operate in situations that were constantly changing was very, very hard and super important. And I think being able to scale is really critical today.
Gary?
What matters less, as you said, what matters?
So when you're hiring, what do you look for in hiring now?
Okay.
Compared to 5 years ago.
Boy, I think we touched on some of the themes, so I'll be pretty quick. I think I'm concerned less in terms of somebody jumping around in jobs and more the sense of, have they taken something really complex and made it and made something out of it? I think this idea, you said it really well, this idea of being able to synthesize, simplify, focus from the getting the signal out of the noise is exactly right.
Yeah, I would say, just to build on that, comfortable with ambiguity, willing to surf through it. Some people really struggle with that, and a lot of our environment right now requires you to enter ambiguity to actually find the answer. And then you also have to learn how to distill it and execute on it and focus on it. So I'm always ask the same sets of questions to people. Tell me about a project that you went into that you had no understanding of how to solve, and what did you do? What did you do next? How did you make it successful? What were the things that you did along the way that allowed you to socialize that with stakeholders? How did you get to a point where you knew that there was an outcome that was of value? And then I ask the same sets of questions over and over and over again, through their career. And if I find that there's someone who's been able to sort of wrangle that and then make sense of it, then I'm like, okay, that's great. Let's pull this person in.
I would say probably, since retail is especially apparel retail is such a tough industry today, I really look for someone that really truly have a passion for fashion and apparel. I mean, you have to be really crazy to be in this business right now. So you have to really, truly love clothes. I know it sounds so simple, but if you don't love that, you shouldn't really be doing it. That's kind of, I would say, I start there first. Of course, then it builds up from there.
I think the thing I've always looked for is hustle. And it's I'll never care if you went to Stanford, I care if you have that hustle, that sort of drive and that hunger. And something that I think more about now than I ever did is just a sense of open-mindedness, the sort of beginner's mindset of even if you've been doing something forever, the world's changing. Are you able to approach a situation not with the I know it all attitude, but I'm here to be open and to learn? And then to echo your point earlier, thinking through, and there's two questions that I ask every single interview. So this is a precursor if any of you ever work with me. But I ask the same two questions in every interview, which always seem like softball questions, but honestly are probably the most important answers I can get from you. And it's if you were going to give a TED Talk, what would it be? Because what I want to know is, tell me you're passionate about something. I don't care what it is. I don't care if your answer is crafting. Like, be passionate. If you can't care about something, how am I going to get you to care about the job that I pay you for if you can't care about your passion in life? And then tell me your worst travel story, because I need to understand how you deal with uncomfortable situations, how you deal with crisis, and what do you consider worse? If you're going to say, well, you know what, my seat didn't recline, and that's your worst travel story, I'm sorry, there's way worse things that can happen in life. I can't deal with this. And did you panic? Did you freak out? Or did you say, you know what, I had no luggage, I had no place to stay, and I had no money, but I figured it out. Because you need that, I figured it out. Also now, you guys all have the answers.
Can I come back to just because I think this is an awesome question. I think one of the things that gets to maybe why some folks are here, and certainly as people think about how to maybe repot themselves at times, I think people find themselves in positions where they sell themselves short in terms of I didn't get that job, or I didn't go to that company and somebody else went to that company. I'm competing with somebody else who went to that company. I think one of the reasons that the way you've kind of articulated this is so right. Chris Cox, who runs product at Facebook, who's one of my bosses, asks a similar question. In an interview, he asks, what's the one thing you know more about than anybody else, and why do you know that? And that has nothing to do with where you work. That has to do with what makes you go. And I think the more you give yourself credit for that and use that as a way to tell your story, we talked about that, different folks talked about that on stage, like, what's your story and what's the story you bring to your work? What's the story you bring to others, to other people? I think that is a really good central way to think about it.
So along those lines then, when I look at resumes now, it used to be in the old days you look at a resume, and if somebody wasn't somewhere, if they had more than 2 or 3 jobs, like, oh my God, short timer or whatever, right? Yeah. Now you look and it's every 2 years people are somewhere else, right? And I mean, in the old days, it would be, oh my God, that's no way I'm hiring this person. Today, it's a very, very different story, right? So when you think about that, and when you're thinking about all this, how do you look at that today? Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I just have an example. A former colleague of mine at SAP had been there 16 years, and I was introducing her to some folks inside of Google, and they were like, well, she's been there 16 years. Well, and it was like a negative, and I'm like,
we're hiring some people who are 16 at Facebook right now.
That's right. And I was like, you have no idea of her, her journey and what she's done and how awesome she is, and she's perfect for us. And she's going to come here and she's going to stay for 16 more. It's not a bad gig. So I think that there's a notion about that we have this kind of flip thing. The other thing that I think I'm always looking for is intention. Like, I'm looking for people who are really intentional, whatever it is, right? So that they have something that they find focus in, and they want to know. They ask themselves questions like, how can I get better at this? And you can never answer that question because the answer is different every day. And if you can have questions, if you find people on your staff who are like that, it's great, because you can incentivize them towards projects and programs if you know how they work and that they're wired that way. And so I think, I'm always looking for folks that, there's some intentionality in terms of how they operate. And I think that's actually the interesting thing about the world that we're entering into right now. You get this toolkit of all these crazy skills, and then you bring your flavor to it, and you ought to be successful in that. I think if one environment doesn't work for you, it's not because you're not great. It's just because it was the wrong environment for you to be successful in. And that's something that I often find myself coaching even people on my own team who outgrow a role and we don't have a role for them. I'm the first one to kick them out of the company, but I'll find them a great job somewhere else with someone I know in my network, because it's like, okay, you need to go because you're not going to be happy. You don't know it yet, but you're not going to be happy. So.
No, that's very good. There's so much stuff that we can talk about on this one. I want to shift a little bit because this is kind of related, and would like to start with the ladies on this one, but everybody feel free to answer this. But how can women who often wait until they have all the skills shift to an adventure career path?
You need someone else to kick you in the ass. No, it's a really interesting question, and I'm assuming everybody knows this. It's women don't apply for a job unless they feel like they have 100% of the skills, where men apply for a job if they feel like they have 60% of the skills. And it's a hard thing to overcome. And I read a Facebook post today that was someone going to play soccer with their son and their daughter. And there was a bunch of kids on a soccer field, and all the boys went out, and the son went out and played. And the daughter said, I don't want to go. They're like, why? Why didn't you want to go play soccer? She's like, because I'm going to be the only girl. No one's asked me to go play. And her mom was like, honey, get your ass out there and go play. You can do this. And for that, it really echoes for me. It's the power of the network, the power of mentorship, and that confidence and permission to go and to do it. And I will tell you, I'm great at helping other people negotiate for their own salaries and reminding them that they should go and aspire for more. What I am terrible at is negotiating my own salary and pushing myself to do that, which is why I will have a network of people that will literally say, oh, you never accept the first offer. You go back and you ask for 20% more because women get paid less, which is the exact thing that I said when I negotiated my offer at Box.
I could share probably my own personal story. As you know, I was a founding member at Old Navy, and I remember, 3-4 years into it, my boss, who's Mickey Drexler at that time, of the CEO of Gap Inc., asked me would I want to be the president of Old Navy, and I'm like, oh no, of course not. I have a great job. I'm the EVP. I have in product, and I actually turned down that job because I just thought I'm so comfortable. I'm doing well. And then, of course, he was bringing people in, interviewing for the job. And every time he brought somebody in, I'm like, bum, this was my new boss. Yeah. And a year later, it took me a year. Wow. And I sat in his office, and I said, you talk to me about being president. Actually, I think I want that job now. And he started laughing. He said, well, it's about time. It took you long enough to ask for it. I thought about it. And the other 3 guys were my partners, were EVP, and one had product, one had the field, one had finance, and of course I said, only if the other 3 of them think I should be the president. And he started laughing. Only you would ask that question.
I would ask
exactly
the exact same question.
Because I said because we started the business together, and I just want to make sure they're okay with that. Because now that I'm going to be their boss versus the peer, and of course all 3 of them said, of course, you deserve to be the president. But I thought a lot about it afterward. Would any of them would do the same? Probably not. So I think we do sell ourselves short. It took me way too long to really ask for that job. And, I just think that's something that I talk about is because I really want to make sure that, as women, we shouldn't do that. Because we really, more often than not, are more ready for those positions.
One quick anecdote for that. This is clearly a sensitive topic for both of us. I have a friend of mine, and I'm going to tell her story, at another company that is focused a lot on diversity and inclusion and has a surge program to increase diversity in senior leadership meetings. And one of the things that happens with this is they wanted to get 30% of people in senior meetings to be women. So it means if the standard is getting in as an EVP, to get to that 30% number, sometimes they'd have to invite someone that was a VP or a director. What that could mean is her boss might not get invited to this meeting, but she will. So when they started doing this, a lot of the women were going up saying, are you sure I should be going? I'm really uncomfortable because my boss isn't going, and I don't know, I'm gonna sit out of this. And then my friend, who's very senior at that company, goes, do you see that guy who he's going in through the surge program? Do you know what he asked me when we invited him and not his boss? She's like, what? So I need a vegan meal, and am I flying business to this? And where's my room? Because I'm not going to be near the elevator. She's like, that's what he asked me. He didn't ask me for permission to be here. He asked for a special meal and the right trip and the right room. You just asked me if you were allowed to go. You need to start thinking like that because you deserve to be here as much as everybody else.
I'll just grab one thing. So when I started at GE, it was my first day, and Beth Comstock, who at the time was a CMO and is now vice chair of the company, was my new boss. And I walked in, and I said, Beth, how should I approach this job? And she said, you should approach it that we want to fire you every day. and I was like, and I go, why? And she goes, works for me. and so, I think part of it is finding mentors, and she's an amazing person. She gives back so much to the business community as a whole, but I think I think for all of us, we actually have to get over ourselves and focus on being intentional and learning that the environment you place yourself in will either work out for you or not. It's not really about you or the company. It's that those two things may or may not work. So just bring your full self to work. And you know, obviously in the Valley right now, there's a huge conversation around how does that work for minorities and for women and, you know, underrepresented populations in our workforces. But to the extent that you can find a mentor network, it really, really helps. And I think we should definitely find ways to also celebrate people who are out there who are really doing things like Beth did.
Anything else? We're going to try to wrap up in the next minute or two. Any comments on that?
Yeah, well, my other boss at Facebook is Sheryl Sandberg, who wrote Lean In and talks about it. One of the things, quotes she talks about sometimes is well, two things. One is I think it's wonderful that we're talking about this the way we're talking about it. Clearly, look, if you look at some of the press in the Valley in the last set of weeks, there just needs to be more of this conversation. I think people need to feel the ability to be really open and thoughtful. Madeleine Albright has this quote, which I really like, which is, "There's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women." And I would probably add, there's a special place in hell working for those women for men who don't help women. And so there's a lot of this. You see the signalings that goes on in meetings, you know, where you're not making sure that people, as was one of the first principles of Cheryl's TED Talk, actually, that then became the book, which was, you know, making sure that everybody has a seat at the table. And making sure that everybody's voice is heard in meetings. And I do think the diversity of boards, of senior leadership, in politics would make a big difference. I'll channel one other thing that Cheryl says, because I'm a poli-sci major from background. Says most of the countries in the world are run by men, and that doesn't seem to be going very well. So I just think that this is something that's early, but I think it's wonderful for our kids and for our coworkers that we're at least moving toward better.
No, very good. We want to be respectful of your time, and we're a little bit past 9 o'clock, and we promised you we'd get you out of here and in bed in time for go to work tomorrow. I do want to close with with again thanking you for joining us. I recently did a presentation at a company and was kind of looking at some comments about things that are changing in our world. And I remember one particular article I think Steve shared with me that was, our father maybe had one job their entire lives. Folks our age maybe have 6 jobs in our lives. Our kids are going to have 6 jobs at the same time. And so I think, if you can't have any drag, you can't have, when we're talking about feeling it and all that kind of stuff, I mean, if it's going to take us 2 to 3 years to pivot, you certainly can't take an extra 2 to 3 years to think about it. And so for us at ISDI, I mean, just so you know what we're about, please go to the website. The biggest gift that you can give us is to talk about us and try to think about someone that would benefit from this. Our program was actually approved by the state of California last year as a master's degree program. So we are really an only program of our kind. And we have 16 different modules that are run by wonderful leaders just like these. And we will, going forward, have other ISDI Talks events as well. And all of you are on the list, and we hope you join us. Thanks again, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.